Today on Hectic History, we're talking about one of the cruelest and one of the most downright terrifying Viking women to ever set sail, Freydís Eiríksdóttir. She was a vicious Viking who brought fear to the New World, wielded a sword while 8 months pregnant, and taking that whole don't mess with me attitude to a brand new level. But before we get into that story, if you enjoy learning about epic battles, legendary figures, shocking real stories from the past, and much more, you're in the right place. So strap in, get your axe, hit that subscribe button, and let's get started. Freydís, who was born in the 10th century in Iceland, came into this world with some serious Viking cred. Her father was none other than Erik the Red. He was the Viking that founded Greenland's first Norse settlements after being exiled from not one, but 2 different countries. So if Freydís seems a little intense in this story, well, that's just the classic like father, like daughter. And as if the family resume wasn't impressive enough, Freydís also had a pretty well-known brother, Leif Erikson. He's the guy who's credited as the first European to set foot in North America. He got there 500 years before Columbus, so Freydís grew up in a family full of risk takers, with her brother crossing unknown oceans and her father settling down in a frozen wasteland. It's no surprise Freydís became a fierce Viking warrior because she was born with some of the strongest ice-cold Viking blood flowing through her veins. Freydís' life is mostly documented in 2 Viking sagas, the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Erik the Red. Now these 2 sagas give us 2 complete different depictions of Freydís. In the Saga of the Greenlanders, she's nasty, ruthless, and greedy, but in the Saga of Erik the Red, she's more heroic. So let's start with the Saga of the Greenlanders. Around the year 1000, her brother Leif Erikson and a group of Norse explorers stumbled upon a mysterious new land which is now known as Newfoundland, Canada. But back then, they called it Vinland, supposedly because of the wild grapes they found growing there. Freydís wasn't about to let her brother have all the fun in this new world. She wanted a slice of that action for herself, but not as a tag-along. She wanted to lead her own expedition with her own crew. For Freydís, it was less about the scenery and more about the potential to make a name for herself and maybe get rich along the way. So Freydís hatches a plan. She makes a deal with 2 Icelandic guys, Helgi and Finnbogi, to sail together to Vinland. She strikes a deal with them to split all the profits 50-50 and live the Viking dream. She even gets her brother Leif to let her use the houses that him and his crew had built during their expeditions in Vinland. Helgi and Finnbogi also agreed with Freydís that each bring an equal number of men and supplies. But this is where things start getting sketchy. Freydís probably had her fingers crossed behind her back when she made that deal, because she smuggled a few extra Vikings onto her ship, so she has a larger force than Helgi and Finnbogi. So they all set off to Vinland. Freydís' husband Thorvald also tags along, and Helgi and Finnbogi go on a separate boat with their crew. When Freydís finally gets to Vinland, she realizes Helgi and Finnbogi got there first, and they've already moved into the houses. Naturally, when Freydís arrives and sees them in her brother's buildings, she's absolutely fuming. In true Viking fashion, she marches up to them angrily and tells them to move out. These are her brother's houses and are for her and her crew. Now this was the start of some serious tension between the 2 crews. After this rocky start, both parties decided to set up separate camps to avoid each other. It's like that awkward moment at a family reunion when everyone realizes Uncle Larry and Aunt Susan can't be at the same table together, so they're quietly seated at opposite ends of the hall. But Freydís was hatching up another plan. She wasn't about to let the brothers live peacefully, so she walks up to the brothers and casually asked, "How's it going over here?" Now the brothers, exhausted from all the drama, they tried to play it cool. shrugging and saying, "We're fine, you know, just trying to keep things civil." By this point, they were tired of all the arguing and tension, so they agreed to make peace. Now, this is where things take a complete nasty turn, because when Freydís got back to her camp, she claimed the brothers had attacked her. She told her husband Thorvald that Helgi and Finnboga had beaten her up. Then in classic Viking fashion, she demanded revenge, calling her husband a coward if he didn't go after them, and threatened to divorce him. Nothing like a bit of emotional blackmail to get things moving. So Freydís' husband, being the ultimate Viking simp that he is, rounds up his men and plans a sneak attack on Helgi, Finnboga, and all their crew. He decides to wait until Helgi and Finnboga and their entire crew were sound asleep. Meanwhile, while they're out cold sleeping, Thorvald creeps into the enemy camp like an elusive fox. He's got his crew right behind him, all these hardened, strong warriors trying to tiptoe around and be quiet like little ballerinas. Their eyes are completely wide open with glee, clutching their weapons. You can practically hear them exchanging smug grins to each other, knowing the poor souls asleep in this camp have no idea that their last nap is about to be cut very short. They move through the shadows, and then boom, they strike. Thorvald and his crew make quick work of the camp like they're slicing into a turkey at Thanksgiving. It's a one-sided massacre, killing one unfortunate foe to the next, barely breaking a sweat. I mean, no wonder Freydís called him a coward earlier on. Instead of confronting Helgi and Finnboga and finding out if it was true that they attacked his wife, this guy just goes in and kills everybody in their sleep. But here's where the story gets even worse. After wiping out all the men, there's 5 women left in their camp. Now Thorvald and his crew turn to Freydís and basically tell her, "We can't kill these unarmed women. Even for Viking standards, slaughtering unarmed women felt like crossing a line." Now Freydís is in absolute disbelief. She glares at the men like they're the weakest, puniest excuses of warriors she's ever seen. Finally, after the men are standing there speechless for a while, she snaps and tells them, "Fine, I'll do it myself." And she does. Freydís picks up an axe and takes matters into her own hands, single-handedly finishing off every single woman left in the camp. The next day, Freydís didn't seem too bothered by what she had done at all. She gathered her men and made things abundantly clear. No one was to breathe a word of the massacre when they returned to Greenland. This was the classic snitches get stitches. If anyone even thought about spilling the beans, she assured them they'd meet the same fate as Helgi and Finnboga. And guess what? Not a single person spoke up. They didn't dare to speak up after what they saw her do the night before. So Freydís and Thorvald packed up their new loot, boarded their ship, and sailed back to Greenland as if they'd just had a nice, uneventful trip abroad. As they returned to Greenland, Freydís put on her best innocent face when she went back and met with her brother Leif. When Leif asked about Helgi and Finnboga, Freydís spun a tale about how the brothers had decided to stay in Vinland and how they found a nice patch of land and couldn't bear to leave. Leif, being the trusting brother, seemed to accept the story. But as any Viking would tell you, secrets don't stay buried forever. Eventually, rumors of Freydís' massacre made their way back to Greenland, and Leif, now extremely suspicious, decided to investigate. He took 3 men from Freydís' crew, applied some classic Viking interrogation techniques, also known as torture, and got the full story out of them. Leif was horrified, not just because of the sheer brutality of Freydís' actions, but also because it was a major stain on the family's already questionable reputation. However, Leif was in a bit of trouble. Viking law was pretty clear about what should happen to people who killed without a cause, but it was too hard on him to enforce this law on his own sister. So rather than ordering the punishment Freydís so richly deserved, he decided to let her be. But he did make a prophecy of sorts remarking that he didn't think her descendants would see much prosperity given her deeds. And it turns out he was right. Freydís' reputation took a nosedive, and her descendants were shunned. Now this saga shows Freydís as a cruel, horrible person, but let's take a look at the saga of Erik the Red, which puts Freydís in more of a good, heroic light. In this particular story, Freydís joins another expedition to Vinland. It's all going fine until suddenly the expedition runs into a big problem, the Skrælingjar. Now the Skrælingjar is an Old Norse term for the native people, and to the Vikings they were completely unfamiliar foes. So the Vikings, they were camping out, probably roasting some fish over the fire, telling tales of their adventures. Then suddenly, bam, the natives launch a surprise attack with something the Norsemen had never seen before. The saga says they used war slings or catapults. They basically started flinging rocks at the Vikings, and it totally freaked the Vikings out. They all started panicking and started fleeing. But while the men are running around in terror, who's standing there, unfazed and ready to fight? Well, it's none other than an 8-month-old pregnant Freydís. While all the men are fleeing, she turns to them and gives them all a nasty verbal smackdown. She basically says, "Why run you away from such worthless creatures? Stout men that you are, let me but have a weapon. I know I could fight better than any of you." But of course, no one handed her a weapon. Everybody was way too busy running for the hills. So Freydís spots the sword of a fallen Viking soldier, picks it up and jumps right into battle mode. She's standing there, sword in hand, surrounded by enemies, and then she takes things to an extremely bizarre next level. She undoes her garment, exposes her chest, and starts slamming the sword against her breast, while screaming with one of the most terrifying battle cries. After seeing that, they were like, you know what? We're good. Let's just pack up and go home. And that's exactly what they did. They started fleeing and got back in their boats and left. Now the natives weren't the only ones that were shocked. Freydís' bravery left her Viking companions absolutely speechless too. I mean, they probably felt a little ashamed as well, because while they were off fleeing, she was out there weapon in hand, ready to take them all on with her breasts out. Freydís didn't just survive, she earned legendary status among the Vikings. Here was a woman, 8 months old pregnant, who took a stand when the others couldn't, and she did it with such ferocity that the attackers actually ran away. So there you have it. That's the story of one of the most ruthless Viking woman warriors. Now, was she a hero or was she a villain? To be honest, she was probably a bit of both. The saga of the Greenlanders shows her more as a heartless warrior and shows more of her ruthless side, while the saga of Erik the Red shows how she stood up for her crew and fought for everybody. But one thing's for sure, Freydís made a mark on history in true Viking fashion. Whether she was heroically defending her people or just letting her temper get the best of her, her story shows us a side of the Viking world that's raw, messy, and a little bit hectic. If you enjoyed this dive into the fearsome side of history, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe for more hectic history.